morning, everyone. I hope you had a good night. It was a really fantastic day yesterday, and I'm really excited to start the second day of talks. Just a few practical things. Yesterday we ran out of cups, so we're going to ask you to maybe stick to your cup. And then also, if you took some photos yesterday and you want to share them, feel free to send them to me, to my email. So we are excited to start with Dr. George Waddell. He's a Performance Research and Innovation Fellow at the Royal College of Music, as well as Honorary Research Associate at Imperial College London. He will present his work on decoding and optimizing musical performance through multimodal capture, analysis, and simulation in ecologically valid performance contexts. So welcome, George Waddell.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Yesterday was absolutely fascinating, and I'll admit I feel a little bit of an imposter because I am not a data scientist, I'm not an engineer, I'm not the one who actually does the analysing, the decoding, the pulling the signal from the noise. But I have a great interest in it, and indeed a great professional as well as a personal interest in it. I'm a pianist myself. I did my bachelor's and master's degrees in piano performance, and that still drives what I do, wanting to address the direct challenges of what we face as performers in preparing, executing, reviewing our performance, and helping share it with the next generation as well as the world. But I'm also driven by my professional interests, and particularly the fact that I work in a place like this, where indeed I share your interest in and desire to push the bounds of what we know about the human condition and how people think and how they behave and how they communicate, and also to push the bounds of our methodologies and what we can capture and what we can learn. And that sort of foundational research is very important, and indeed sort of half of my personality there as Performance Research and Innovation Fellow is spent doing this kind of foundational research, building that up. But I wear a second hat here, the other split side of my personality, as area lead in performance science for our programs. So I sit with our other area leads, the lead for history and musicology and oral skills and education, as well as the heads of all of our instrumental and vocal faculties, designing our curriculum. And it's my job to make sure that performance science, that evidence-based empirical approaches, are woven into the very fabric of how we teach our students. Literally from day one, every undergraduate musician that shows up at our doors, the very first day, Monday morning at 10 a.m., the very first class they ever take is one of ours, L4 Healthy Musician, one of the only dedicated modules in the world in music school or conservatoire devoted to musicians' mental, psychological, physiological health and well-being, because we take this very seriously at the college, that our musicians, just as they take care of their notes, and they take care of their repertoire, and they take care of their instruments, well, they have to take care of themselves as well. And this is as important as, say, their history classes. So we build that straight into the heart of the curriculum. And indeed, it's my job to help them now. And this is where I feel a bit of a split personality in this work, is that so much of the work that we do provides great insights and benefits, but sometimes it takes some time for that insights to trickle through the process into the system. And by the time it comes through our work and our analyses, our interpretations, our conferences, our journals, and maybe makes it to the educators and the practitioners, perhaps a decade's gone by. But they don't need help a decade from now, they need help today. Today they're experiencing pain and injury and burnout and depression and anxiety, and today they're facing an industry that's never been as challenging. So I come today maybe with a slightly different perspective on the work we're doing here, is how can we find that balance? How can we do this research with the same sort of rigor and pushing that methodology forward, but also how can we pull meaning out today for our musicians really at the forefront of their industry and pushing the bounds of what people can do. You know? And one of the ways we could do that is because we're quite unique. We have us, the Center for Performance Science, and this year we celebrate our 25th year since Aaron Williamson founded it back in 2000. And what we do, as I say, is we draw together this applied practice of teaching and working with musicians, being performers ourselves, but also bringing scientific tools, the tools of the social sciences, of medicine, of sociology, economics, essentially whatever we need. We're very pragmatic about this to solve the problems we have in front of us. We're quite a small team, there's 6 of us, plus a master's in performance science program, about 25 students, about 25 odd PhD students, one of whom you'll meet today, Kobe, who you've met already. And in doing this, we also cut across domains. So of course we work with musicians, being where we are, but we look across performance. Laura mentioned we are based in the Faculty of Medicine at Imperial College London, so we're very interested in the performance of medical practice, surgeons, GPs, frontline practitioners there, looking at communication, looking at preparation, looking at risk. But we work with the world of sport, with football and rugby and cricket leagues, with Olympians, with various professional leagues around the world. We've engaged with the military, we've engaged with education, with science, doing a lot of work lately with CEOs and business people and business schools, so that we can learn from them and adapt methods from them, but also more and more so that it seems that they want to learn from us, that there is a great deal, as we've heard yesterday as well, about what music lets us shine a lens on and how music becomes this very useful tool to understand wider human performance and behavior and cognition that some of these other fields are particularly interested in. So it's a very fun job. We get to meet a lot of interesting people, bring a lot of interesting people together. So when I think about this idea of performance capture and then capturing musical activity. So for me, of course, it's inevitably going to be focused on this idea of expert practice. And indeed, how do we take the expertise of those sort of great, lauded experts of the past and bring that expertise to the musicians of now, and even push the bounds of that expertise? And of course, anyone involved in music in any way sort of knows how we do that, right? It's a little game of telephone that we do, master and apprentice to apprentice to apprentice, over centuries, yes? I mean, we musicians, we like to keep track of our lineage. So when you're an undergrad, you sort of do this. My piano teacher's times 17 was Mozart. And that's not uncommon, you get a lot of students, and the tree grows widely. But this is how expertise is transferred in our world, yes? From person to person. But it's not a perfect system, is it? There can be breaks in the chain. Maybe people don't have access to the teacher in that lineage. Maybe a person can be indeed a great performer, a great expert, but they're just sort of a crap teacher, right? They're not mutually sort of guaranteed skills, yes? Or maybe the student isn't in a place, or it isn't a good learner, and we can think about what that means. So it's an imperfect system. It's probably the best system we've got, but it's imperfect. And it's our job to figure out how to harness it, how to optimize it, how to make it more accessible. And one of the ways, of course, that we can do that is we can bring technology to the table. And this is what certainly we try to do. This is what we've heard many examples of using these technologies to understand the musician, to try to capture that expertise in different ways, to help that process of communicating it, to help that communication between teacher and student, or indeed to give student or teacher access to that knowledge if they don't find themselves lucky enough to be within that lineage or with access to that great teacher. And again, this can be very fruitful, and we've all seen the benefits of this. Though there's another, maybe slight wariness that I have about this process, certainly when I'm doing this process, is that sometimes this process, even though the intent is to help musicians, when it comes to the specific musician, the process can be a bit more extractive. Yes? They come into our lab, they play for us, and we take all of this data, and we go, okay, thanks, bye, right? I'm starting to get a little tired of writing these participant information sheets and consent forms that says possible benefits to participant. Well, none, but hopefully this will further understanding, and maybe someday that'll help you. And again, I'm not saying we shouldn't do that research is important. But it's certainly my experience, I don't know about you, it's a heck of a lot easier to recruit people for the studies when you can tell them they're going to get something out of it. And just paying them helps, that's pretty quick. But for example, one of the easiest recruitment jobs I ever had is when we ran a study on musicians' hearing. And when we told them, come have your hearing tested, but also you're going to get an audiological consultant, you're going to be told something about you and your hearing, you're going to learn something about yourself. So, oh, free hearing consultations, sign me up. We're giving something back to them. So if I think of sort of a different approach to this, and not a new approach, again, this is what we all do, but just trying to give it a bit of a name. I mean, of course, what we're really trying to do is in having the musicians share their data with us, we're often sort of striving for this cycle, right? We're trying to capture performance in myriad ways. We want to then take that noise, as it were, that raw data, and analyze it to find the signal, to find the pattern in that process. We then need to evaluate that. Okay, we found a signal, we found a pattern. Who cares? Which are worth applying? Which are valuable? And indeed, we evaluate it. Different patterns, different findings might have different value to people. So we have to figure out what's important among those signals. And then, of course, we need to put that into practice to actually enhance that practice of musicians. And again, this is a cycle that most, if not all of our research certainly strives to, and maybe sort of over time can do. But there are, again, many sort of potential breaks in that chain, or at least potential sort of barriers where that process slows dramatically. So even in the capture, the very act of having to put on the markers, put on the probes, put all this on, that can be a barrier to them even showing up in the lab in the first place or engaging with this process. Or the fact that where we're collecting these data maybe doesn't actually reflect, or the way in which we're collecting the data doesn't actually reflect their actual practice. So just the sheer burdens on the capture of it can slow us down. And then, of course, in the analysis, well, we all know that just takes a huge amount of time, doesn't it? And yeah, AI is starting to help, but the amount of post-processing, but also just the amount of expertise it takes to do that, the sheer sort of resource it can take to pull all these data together. And again, we've seen examples of this yesterday, and you'll all be very familiar, probably more familiar than me, with that process of how much work that is to find that signal in the noise. And then evaluating it. Well, does that signal even get the opportunity to then have the eye of the practitioner? How much of those signals and findings find their way into academic journals and chapters that are sort of read in our community, but never actually make it to the eyes or the ears of those who they're meant for? Or if they do, it can take quite a long time. Maybe some enterprising practitioner will take an evidence-based approach and put it into their treatises and practice and maybe share it along. So you might have this sort of spotty version. Though indeed we'll see from Kobe later today, the challenge sometimes of getting that knowledge into these treatises that the musicians may or may not be reading. And then, of course, even if the teacher or the instructor or the source of that information is valid and is sound and is based on the latest research, well, is the musician going to understand it? Are they going to execute it? Are they going to do it correctly? Are they going to do it consistently? So, something I'm very interested in is figuring out how do we accelerate this process. And that can either mean just taking the entire loop and just speeding it up. How do we get that knowledge back to practitioners as quickly as we can? Or can we even set up parallel loops? That yes, there might be the slightly longer, more rigorous scientific process, but in the meantime, can we give something to those musicians because they need the help now? But also I think as well, we're living now in an age increasing where people are quite skeptical of their data being taken and used in ways they don't quite understand. How often have you clicked no thank you when your phone gives you, oh, we'd love to collect your data to help us understand our process? Like, you're fine, right? The billionaires are doing okay. But it's, we'd like to collect your data, and therefore what we're going to do is it'll allow you this. You can have customized ads if that's of interest to you. Something for your data, some insight. Can we bring that back to you? So that's the kind of process I'm interested in. And in doing that, technology becomes a great way to do this. So what I want to share with you this morning is a couple projects, somewhat sort of related, thinking about how we've gone about approaching this problem. We certainly haven't solved it. And indeed, this is also a call for help, because I'll take you to where we are now, and indeed where we need help and collaboration from those of you thinking about these kind of signals. And the two things I want to think about is yes, one, how can we use technology and data capture to try to accelerate that loop, and what might that process look like? But then also taking a step back and thinking about this challenge that we all face, of this challenge of collecting the data and understanding performance in environments that might not actually match, the environments where the data matters, the places where our musicians actually execute it. So let's start with technology, and again we can keep our violinists in mind. When we first approached this ourselves a little less than 10 years ago, that became quite apparent is for those musicians who wanted to engage with technology in their learning, they're often sort of stuck between two extremes. On the one side, very complex, very rigorous, very advanced technologies, but also quite laborious in their use. Lots of things to wear, lots of things to put on, lots of things to even perhaps invade the instruments, which musicians hate. The moment you have to start putting stuff on or in their instrument, the conversations often stop, at least at the level where we were. But on the other side, a great many technologies available for music learning, but geared toward quite a different audience, towards beginners, towards children, very gamified, very effective, hundreds of these. When we first counted them, we found, I think, 174 of them. This was back in 2016, so obviously many more now. So when thinking about our high-level musician, sort of trapped between these two extremes, finding sort of nothing really for them. So what this sort of observation led to was the first major project that sort of brought us into this world, brought us into your world. So this was the Tell Me project, Technology Enhanced Learning of Musical Instrument Performance. And this was a Horizon 2020 project. I'm working with some great partners, some of which you might be familiar with, the MTG group at University of Ponte Fabra, the Infomuse group, University of Geneva, as well as a couple of corporate partners thinking about design, thinking about engineering, thinking about how these technologies come together. And it was a 3-year project where we focused particularly on the violin to give ourselves something to look at. But before diving in, we wanted to just get a sense of musicians' relationship with technology. And again, these sort of Western classical musicians at the height either of their training or indeed already in the profession. So we started with a large-scale survey of these musicians. So again, sort of senior level students and those in the profession. Just getting a sense of how they engaged with technology, their attitudes towards technology. I won't go through all the details, but I'll just highlight a couple findings that still sort of resonate with me some years on here. And one of them was this very, actually quite simple observation that we almost sort of take for granted as musicians and in this profession, which is that technology has fundamentally changed the way music happens. How music is composed, how it's produced, how we listen to it, how we share it, how we engage with it, how we choose what to... It's changed everything. Except when you walk down our halls and look in the window, those musicians in their practice rooms, in their teaching studios, are sort of doing the same thing they were 400 years ago. And when we started just even leading into the survey, just doing sort of interviews and talking to musicians as we sort of designed the questionnaire, we wanted to get a sense of, well, what technologies are you using now? And we often had to sort of preface a lot of that with what is a technology, because that was a bit of a point of confusion. So when you put aside, well, your clarinet's a technology and the light bulb, so what sort of devices, what things are you bringing into the practice room and the teaching studio? And what we found is there were 4. And this is the part in the lecture where I often like getting my students to try to guess what the 4 were. I won't necessarily do it for time, but you can sort of run through them in your head, see how well you do. Up on the board, what's the first one? Well, it's the metronome, and then it's the tuner, and then it's audio recording, and it's video recording. And what I just loved about this is none of this is new, is it? The metronome, we've had, 200 years? And we're still sort of fighting about it? Like, is this thing good or not? Is it just turning our musicians into robots? We've had a couple centuries. We haven't quite settled that debate. The tuner, well, I mean, we can thank Pythagoras for that, can't we? We've had quite a while on that one. And the audio and video recording, well, that's been around for quite a while as well. And these are the technologies. Incidentally, I've probably now, over the last maybe 3 years, add a 5th. And it's been really interesting to watch this. It's the tablet that's replaced the score. And certainly in our halls, that was like post-COVID 2022, when all of a sudden all the physical scores disappeared. So we are seeing change, but very slowly. Fundamentally, the tools in the practice room haven't changed, but they went through a similar trajectory. They started as analog devices. There was then a period in the sort of 90s and 2000s when they went to electronic devices. This was my era. So this is, I did my undergrad starting 2006. So my metronome looks like that. I'm a pianist, so I don't know what the second thing is. And I had a standalone audio recorder, and my piano professor made me go buy a handheld video camera, right? But then, of course, what happened is they went to the smartphone. And in our survey, and indeed this is a bit out of date, I'm sure these numbers will change, but even at the time, in 2017 rather, as we were doing the study, already the majority of professional and high-level student musicians had moved from the electronic devices to the phone, even though they admitted that the quality often wasn't as good. It was just sheer convenience. So we know that the personal handheld technologies that we carry with us are speeding up this trend. That it took us a long while to get from 1 to 2, but as soon as you're carrying a supercomputer in your pocket, you will take the convenience of using what's there. And again, we saw that with these iPads and tablets, that once they became well enough established, all of a sudden those musical scores that we've been using for 300 years just disappeared in about 12 months. Again, it's quite remarkable to see how quickly that happened. So one observation, that the range of technologies used in this sort of protected sort of enclave, this technology-free enclave of the teaching room, or of the practice room, and particularly the teaching room. And we also found that even where they were using these technologies in the practice room, it's very rare for them to come out in the teaching room. I mean, culture, the very way of doing things, just doesn't accommodate a lot of change very quickly. But on the other hand, maybe with these smart devices, maybe with we are now at an inflection point where there's opportunity for change. Now, the second thing we investigated that stuck with us was thinking about, well, where and why do people engage with technology in their learning? And what we asked them was, well, across these various skills that you have to develop as musicians, where do you use technology to enhance that? And as you can see, most of the results are sort of middle of the line, that yeah, we sort of use it, sort of right around 3 out of 5, as it were. But you'll see a few outliers there that are interesting. A couple spiking up there. So one here on the far left there, were your career skills. So that's them networking, that's social media, that's them finding opportunity, connection, students, employment, etc. But there's that other spike there. See that blue one next to it, quite high? You see what's under it there? Rhythm. There's your metronome rearing its head. It only took 200 years for that to settle in. And then the rest evens out. But then the other outliers are the dips. Look where it's dropped down. We have 3 of them. Handling the instrument, posture, and avoiding injury. So the physical, the use of the body. So we saw an opportunity here. So this is where, in this project, we sort of devoted our efforts. Can we use the latest technologies, the latest for the time, to find ways to bring technology into the space that would be meaningful for them? And we took a few sort of theoretical frameworks to do this. A principle-driven one, I'm sure many of you will be aware of this one, Davis's technology acceptance model. So getting sensible if and when people adopt a new technology, why? What are the drivers? And this is a very popular model. It's been around some time now, and we essentially validated among musicians in our survey here. We found that indeed it explains musicians either take up or intention to take up technology, which is if they're going to use a technology, you need 2 things. It has to be perceived as useful, and it has to be easy to use. And the trick is you can't have one or the other. You always need both. It doesn't matter how useful it is if it's not easy to use, because if it's not easy to use, they'll never find out how useful it is. Now, of course, there's a bit of give there. Some people are sort of more technologically adventurous. Some are your sort of first adopters, and they'll push through poor ease of use to get to the use, but not our musicians. They're really busy, they're a little stubborn, they've been doing it this way for about 400 years. So the bar for ease of use is on the floor. They won't even hop. They need to walk over that barrier of ease of use. And this was a primary driver for us. It meant that all the way through the process, we took a lot of compromises, and I think that this is really the approach to this. Again, that split personality, wanting to use the latest technology, the latest algorithms, the latest rigorous sort of methodologies and approaches, but we want musicians to actually be able to engage with this, and that ease of use staring us in the face all the way through this. The second model then, of course, very familiar one, self-regulated learning. Essentially the best model we've got in educational psychology to explain how people develop skills efficiently, quickly, sustainably. So that planning of practice, executing practice, reviewing that, using that review of what worked through sort of meta strategies and metacognition to drive that practice, and the various components that can make this up. And we reflected a lot on the ways in which technology can actually drive every part of this. I mean, the classic example being simply recordings. Right, like making a recording of your execution of your practice. You can then review that recording and use that to plan. And if anyone's interested, we published a chapter recently sort of outlining our mapping of technologies to driving these individual components of self-regulated learning. But this was the goal. Let's develop technologies that help people regulate their own learning, and in the process will help teachers sort of teach as well, because a good teacher essentially embodies a self-regulated learning process in their student, ideally. And doing this in a way where, again, it's easy to use based on that technology acceptance model. And then I suppose if there was a third inspiration, if not necessarily a model, well, again, it came from this multidisciplinary aspect of our work. And in particular, we turn to the world of sport. Because they're very interesting in how they use data. They're very good at collecting the complexity, but distilling the key components, the key variables. It might be a single angle of a limb, or a certain bit of force on one part of the body. I mean, the rowers are interesting. We chat a lot with the British Olympic rowing teams, and how so much of their data just comes from simple force plates, and looking for just basic asymmetries between the feet, because it's an incredibly symmetrical task of rowing those boats. And the moment that asymmetry is detected, well, that's inefficiency and potential injury down the line. So they're really good at picking out these very discrete signals and inferring from that. The problem, of course, the challenge for us is often in sports, the outcomes are quite quantifiable. Go faster, lift more, put the round thing in the rectangle thing more often, right? And musically, our goals are a little more complex. But sometimes I think musicians, we use that as an excuse. Like, oh, surely the beauty of Tchaikovsky, if we were to reduce that in any way, well, you would lose the magic of it. Yes? So I push against that. Because indeed in sport, what they do is very complex. They're not just putting the ball in the net. It's the beautiful game, right? There's so much complexity and interaction and decision-making and thought. But it doesn't mean you can just throw away the fact that there are discrete skills that can be quantified and looked at and form part of that expertise. And indeed, can we use technology and use these approaches to help musicians overcome those technical challenges more quickly so that they can spend more time doing the fun stuff, learning more repertoire, finding their voice, crafting their interpretations. Yeah. I mean, I think about an example with me where, as a pianist, I had the habit, as many young pianists did, where my left shoulder would sort of ride high, right? You get a lot of tension there. And it wasn't until the first year of my undergraduate training, I don't even play the piano for 15 years at this point, but only then did the teacher start, hey, put that back down. And once a week, I'd have that little feedback, hey, put that back down. But because I'd been doing it for a decade or more, it took a lot of sort of conditioning once a week to embody that. But also, as well, sitting in the practice room by myself all week, falling back into bad habits. And I just sort of think, well, what if there was some little just camera that sat atop the piano, and every time that shoulder went up, just as my teacher would just give me a little tap and remind me, sometimes it was more than a little tap, it would just go beep, right? I don't know, I bet I could solve that in a week rather than 6 months, right? So are there discrete elements of our practice? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. And then we took this inspiration from the world of sport, where they're much more adventurous with this. Though they have their own challenges. We've been talking to the English Football Association recently. In fact, their head of analytics is doing a talk tomorrow at the RCM as part of our 25 years of performance science celebration. And they sort of almost have the opposite problem right now. They're collecting so much data, 150 million data points per match. They're drowning in it. And they're turning to AI to figure out, because their teams of dozens of analysts can't pour through this data quickly enough. Because again, they don't need the findings 10 years from now, a year from now, a week from now. They need it yesterday, because the game's tomorrow, and there's billions of pounds on the line. Yeah? So they're very interested in speeding that cycle up. Yeah. And we were inspired by the fact as well that, of course in music, this concept isn't new. You can go back almost 100 years. 1934 here, Hodgson's cyclographs, a wonderful sort of treatise where, using very sort of early just photography technology, Hodgson here was recognizing that as the bow moves through space, it traces these remarkable patterns. And he sort of writes about these in an academic way. And of course, indeed, speaking with violinists, many of them would talk about this sort of concept, but none of them had ever seen them, right? It's sort of this abstract thought. And maybe you try to, as you're watching yourself in the mirror, watching a video of yourself, try to infer, hey, am I making sort of the figure of 8 the way that I like to? Is it consistent? And here we saw an opportunity. Well, just displaying that's sort of, in some sense, sort of child's play, right? If all they need is that, well, that's something we can do. So in this project, we wanted to sort of build sort of a ground truth. So we started by taking violinists. They would travel out to our partners in Geneva, into their incredible Casa Paganini facility, this wonderful old concert hall where they put in the full motion capture system. And we would get them to record just basic sort of exercise, the whole sort of suite of exercises and repertoire. And what these sort of the engineers were working with, their goal was, okay, send us several professionals, because what we want to do is sort of capture what does perfect violin playing look like. And once we've defined that, here is perfection, or at least here is as close as we can get, then what the model will do is just tell everyone who uses the system, well, here's what you have to do to get to perfection. And we musicians were sort of going, I don't think that's how it's going to work, but hey, you're the experts, let's give it a go. And what did we find? Well, you probably know what happens here. We get 4 violinists, and I chose them quite specifically. I chose them of different heights, different sort of body types, one from sort of a French school of training, one from a German, one from an American, different approaches to the violin. And when the engineers started digging through the data, it was essentially like they were playing 4 different instruments, even though it was a G major scale. And the engineers went, oh, this isn't going to work. And we went, yeah, we sort of warned you about that. There is no one way to play the violin. That doesn't exist. There's no perfect approach. There's no one way. There are many ways. Now, there are variables that you can consider. Are there ways that are more or less consistent, or more or less effective at achieving certain outcomes, or more or less susceptible to injury depending on your body type and dimensions, etc.? But there's no one way. So we pivoted at this point in the project. This won't be a system that evaluates. This won't be a system that tells you your movement is right or wrong. This is simply a system that does the analysis for you, that takes the raw data, turns it into some kind of signal, but in a way, in a language, that musicians can directly understand it and do the evaluation themselves. Let's not wait for us to make assumptions and to go through the process. Let's just bypass us and hand it straight back to the musicians at that point and try to circle that back in real time. So what that means first is you have to make sure the technology learns how to speak the musician's language. So we ran focus groups with violinists, and we gave them sort of a list. Here's sort of the kind of things that we could measure. So we're doing audio analysis, video analysis, motion capture. So we can measure sort of intonation and tone quality and dynamics. We can measure your bow speed and the tilt and the weight, and these sort of various metrics. And we asked them, how would you want to be given this information in the practice room in a way that means anything to you, that you could use immediately? And one of the main things that came out, which sort of in hindsight seems obvious, but at the time we found it really shifted our approach to the design, was, well, musicians already have a language that they use to share information between each other. Certainly Western classical musicians, they write on the score. So what we did is then we gave them scores and colored pencils and got them to literally, okay, draw us what you want it to look like. What would make sense to you? What would you look at and immediately intuitively understand and be able to apply? And then so we had all these drawings, it was wonderful. And then we went into these great sort of design sort of workshops where we'd start sketching out interfaces and software. And then those would turn into mock-ups, and then those would turn into working prototypes. And what we ended up with at the end of the project, what was a system? Essentially a 2-part system. On the left, let's start on the right rather, you see, as I said, so information being written to the score where it matters. So in this case, that's the tilt of the bow showing up as the thickness of the line above the score. And the reason it's going red and green is, in this case, okay, there's a little bit of evaluation happening because the exercise is tilting the bow in a particular rhythm. So full hair tilted, full hair tilted, full hair tilted, full hair tilted, right? And the red is simply telling you, oh, you're sort of in the wrong half of the tilt. The rhythm, when you have something quite objective, is the rhythm correct or incorrect? Fine, we'll take the extra step and help them sort of see those things. But whereas on the right, or on the left rather, sometimes all they needed was just a nice clean visualization of what they're actually doing. And what was really exciting there is, yeah, that's where we could show them in real time these bowing patterns. And we had these magical moments where we had a teacher and a student using it, and the teacher would go, wait, look at that, I've been telling you this for years. This is asymmetrical. You're coming, and the student went, oh, and then fixed it in like 20 seconds. Because she could see it for the first time. She'd never seen it before, and we could show it to her. And moments like that were really powerful and really exciting. It made us feel like we were accelerating how the best teaching of violin, arguably in the world, if you believe some ratings, could actually be changed by someone like me who barely knows how to hold a violin. But through technology and simply showing people what they're doing in a way that makes sense to them could be very powerful. And indeed, with the other system, with the tilt, we ran some trials where you would bring in a violinist, you would ask them to sight read a simple thing, a scale, a simple exercise, record it immediately. They come and they just play it, get a baseline, and say, okay, you've got up to 10 minutes. Just practice it, get it as good as you think you can, and then whenever you think you're done, whenever you think you've got it as good as you can, just let us know and we'll record it again. And then half of them were randomly given our system. So the one, more like the one on the left here, or the right rather. In this case, probably tuned towards, they could actually, you see all the sort of displays down the right-hand side there. So they could choose, you want to look at intonation, you want to look at dynamics, you want to look at, they could decide what aspects they looked at. So half of them get the technology, half of them don't. And what we find is that when we then take those before and after recordings, we give them to evaluators blind, we have them sort of rate them, also do some very basic sort of analysis of sort of intonation and rhythmic accuracy. Well, we find that the improvement, the amount of improvement is doubled when they're using the technology. But then what we also found, because remember I told them they could essentially tell us when they were done, and what we found is those using the software tended to use the full 10 minutes. Whereas the others, like 3 minutes in, would go, yeah, this is fine. I mean, it's a G major scale. How much better is this going to get? Yeah. And then, oh, okay, well, what did we really find? If you practice longer, you get better. Yay, like, oh, we've, earth shattering. But then we reflected on that a bit more. So, wait a minute, why were they practicing longer? What was it about the software that was making them go, oh, maybe this isn't as good as a G major scale can get. Maybe I'm going to linger on this. So initially that finding was disappointing because we had this idea that the technology will not only improve them, but it's going to make them more efficient. It'll make the learning process faster. And here we found it was doubling the length of the learning process. It was making it slower. But, well, is that really a problem? Because if what our goal actually is to get them to self-regulate their learning, which is to not settle when actually there's more, if you went in and had a teacher there, the teacher would say, no, hold on, come on, before you record it again, what about that? What about this? The software was slowing them down. It was making them consider things that they might not have otherwise considered. And yes, it took longer, but arguably it took shorter. And if in that one session you improved that much, where otherwise it might have taken multiple sessions to get you that far, yeah? So then the fundamental question, okay, well, if these things work so well, do all the students at the RCM use them? And why? Surely they're flying off the shelves around the world. No, project dies. Why? Well, have a look first. Do you see what it takes to make this thing work? Markers on the bow, markers on the violin, a Microsoft Connect that 3 months before the end of the project, Microsoft discontinued. We were so proud, so we're going to use commercial-grade hardware that people can just buy, and then they discontinued it. And then what happens? You all know this bit. The project ended. Funding ran out. Everyone got distracted by their other projects. So much potential there, but we fell at the capture. Once you have the data, very exciting things we can do with it. But even in this, you got to clip some things to the bow, the violin, they hated that. That's not Madeline Mitchell's violin, it's a crappy one that she's playing for the demo because she wasn't willing to put the markers on her violin. And under the Connect, you had to stand in a particular way, and we built a little calibration tool with circles that, when you're, okay, got it, perfect, don't move. Yeah, it's not practical, so we fell at capture. Doesn't matter how useful it is, if it's not easy to use, it might as well not exist. So the project sort of died at that point, funding ends, but it lives on. As part of the process as well, we developed different ways of once you have the data, how do you share it with others, how do you plan your practice with it, all these sort of great ideas. But again, unless you could actually capture the data and feed it into it, they're just boring diaries, right? We need the data in there. And indeed, we incidentally, if you're interested in this sort of process and what we did, it's a chapter in Gary's Oxford Handbook of Music Performance of outlines what we did and a lot of what we're talking about here. I mentioned that paper at the start as well. But it carried on. In a project I did, for example, about a year later with drummers, very simply just tracking the tips of their sticks as they move through space and what can we learn from that. And indeed, this was really exciting because here this is in a public festival, so here we have some expert drummers, but among them are amateurs, people who have never picked up the sticks before. What I love about this is it doesn't matter if you have any musical training, people tend to pick up pretty quickly where the experts are in this picture, right? Bonus points if you can find my daughter, who at the time was 6 months old. She can't quite reach the drum. Because what you start to notice is expert drumming isn't about a specific way to play the drum, it's about an individual's consistency in playing. That every expert doesn't necessarily hit the drum in the same space, but an expert themselves will hit the drum in the same spot each time, and they'll follow very repeatable patterns. So expertise defined not by as the way of doing it, but by as a consistency and an intention in what they do. And as well, we came up with little games, the idea that, so it was mentioned yesterday, this idea of sort of extracting simple techniques out of what we do, but sometimes those simple techniques are fundamental. For a drummer, just going right, left, is really important. They have to do it a lot. And the sticks move so fast at tempo, the human eye can't see them, they're just a blur. So it can be really difficult to tell if the sticks are hitting the same height each time. You use your ear and you can sort of infer, but ideally you're trying to get to that balance going, because usually your dominant hand goes higher. Yeah? Well, our cameras had no problem seeing that, and we made a little game where you get the more either hand is sort of inconsistent, the higher sort of standard deviation in the top of that sort of movement. Well, that increases the number, and then the more those sort of standard deviations differ, that gives them another number, and the higher the number, the worse you do. Perfect score is 0. And oh boy, they spent hours playing with this thing. And it was amazing to see really seasoned, high-level percussion students, been drumming for years, decades. They'd come in and be actually quite bad at it and a little embarrassed by that. Say, no, let me do it again, And then they would improve, and they would get themselves to a new score. Again, a fundamental part of their technique, that until we just showed them what they were doing, with the most basic evaluation of, hey, is this even or not? I mean, it's up to you whether you want it to be, but if you want it to be and you're not, we want to do something about that, then they can act on that information immediately. And that was very fun. Another thing we experimented with, okay, well, maybe it's wearables. We did a little bit of stuff with sort of EMG wearables. Again, that also got discontinued during the project. It's the problem with commercial hardware, isn't it? And then trying to sort of extract these patterns, can we find a way of doing devices, and then being incorporated into the technologies that more people wear day to day, are again becoming to an inflection point where maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago when we were doing this, we were just slightly too early. It sort of feels like the winds are changing again, that there might be opportunity for the kind of capture that could be useful. And that brings me to segue to the second bit, which I'll touch on very briefly, because this won't take too long, is where we've now started again over the last 12 months or so to explore this world of motion capture with some of the more advanced tools that are now available. But what's driven this, just to take a very quick step back as we come to the end, of the second question of, well, how do we know that what we're collecting is actually relevant where they execute it? Because we have this problem that musicians spend their tens of thousands of hours in sort of rooms that look like that. And indeed, in our research, often they spend a lot of time in rooms that look like that, for better or worse. But fundamentally, for many of our musicians and many of our studies, what we really want to know is what's going on there. Yeah? And I know this isn't news to you. We all think about the ecological validity of our studies, but fundamentally, it's the difference between that and that causes a lot of problems for us. Because it sounds and feels, smells nothing like the same thing, socially, psychologically, physiologically. And we've been wanting to contribute to this problem. How can we help bridge that gap? And again, looking to other domains, well, taking inspiration from, say, aviation, from surgery. How do they bridge the gap from study and execution, study and practice rather, to execution? Well, they use simulators. Places where you can have that high degree of dynamism and variability, but low risk, so that you can experiment. So about 12 years ago now, Aaron Williamson, working with Imperial College, built the world's first music performance simulator. You may be aware of our little simulator here, tucked up in one of our towers. And for 10 years, we were up there tinkering away with these technologies. Some early studies finding that absolutely we could get sort of physiological signals up to a performance-like state, even in our very modest setup. Well, then a couple of years ago, we were very lucky, got a big grant from UK Research and Innovation, and were able to build a next generation version of these. So we took over one of our large performance spaces. A week after they gave us the keys, it looked like that. Don't worry, I'm still employed. But that was, oh boy, I didn't sleep much that month. Because it was a brand new performance space they just finished building, and we tore it apart. And we packed it full of acoustic dampening materials because we wanted an absolute dead acoustic in there so that we could install a Meyer constellation. So at the push of a button, we can recreate any acoustic we want. We then installed giant floor-to-ceiling projection screens, huge short-throw projectors, full-scale concert lighting rig, custom interface. We do scans of our performance venues with LiDAR so that we can recreate them, not just in our acoustic models, but in the Unreal Engine. So that the supercomputer we had to build in the back closet can take on these models to not only recreate the acoustics, but recreate the visuals in a fully sort of manipulatable way, which we can then fill with metahumans driven by human motion. That's Darassi there, he's been in some Marvel films. We spent 2 days in Portsmouth recording about 500 individual motions that audiences and audition panels make, so that ultimately we could feed them into our brand new performance labs. So we have 2 of them. Our small one has a 9-camera OptiTrack motion capture system. We have eye tracking, ECG, various methods of measuring a performer while they are in a simulated performance environment, either in front of our panel or our audiences who can react in different ways. Or instead of the small one, you can step here into our big one, where we can fit entire ensembles, fully sort of immersive audiences that surround you, acoustics that envelop you, panels that can interrupt and ask questions, lighting in the real world as it changes in the virtual world, blurring the line between what is and isn't real. So these are very new spaces for us, that they still have the new car smell. And this is largely where I sort of come to you. We are only now starting to experiment within these new spaces. What new data can we collect? What new understanding can we collect? And crucially, if a musician is already in a technologically advanced room working on their live performance, working on their performance anxiety, what measurement tools can we discreetly involve so that we can be capturing data as we go? So this is the latest project now, and we're already sort of drawing up plans to start doing this over the next few months, working with partners at Imperial and others, though indeed looking for other people who might want to collaborate with us in this and indeed have new exciting technologies that might be worth trying, is what can we point at these musicians? And crucially, if it's something we can point at them as opposed to make them wear, that's where I get very excited, because I want our musicians to be able to learn quickly, to be able to come in and use it often by reducing that burden. And indeed, because these are spaces not just for practice, but where actual performance happens, lots of opportunity to collect actual performance data as well. And indeed, we're doing more and more work in here, not just with music, but things like public speaking. We bring in MBA students, executives, to work on their communication, their public speaking. We train our own students in public speaking. So a whole world there of other forms of human communication, ripe for study, ripe for optimization, using these approaches. So just to say, if you want to know more about this, we've got a new paper that briefly summarizes this work, summarizes these tools, and indeed we're really, as I say, keen to find the opportunities to collaborate, to figure out, well, what can we do with these tools once we have them. What I haven't talked about is how we've embedded this in our curriculum. We don't have time to do that, but this is another sort of great thing in my, great problem on my mind. And if you're interested in what that looks like, a recent book with a chapter in there describing how we take these sort of scientific approaches and have built things like the Healthy Musician module. What does it look like when you take this knowledge and just put it straight into the heart of a world-leading conservatoire curriculum? And instead, I'm sort of contractually obligated to flog our Memphis textbook at every opportunity. In case you have musicians and those that want to come into the scientific practice for the first time, that sort of crash course in the process that models our MSc in performance science. But all to say that this is sort of leading towards the future as we see it. We want to be able to prepare our students for bigger and more dynamic audiences. And as you can imagine, we've already sketched out version 2.0 of these big labs, and we're looking for the money to upgrade that software. But thinking about how can we collect data in those labs to help musicians see firsthand, how does anxiety affect them? How do they perform in different ways? What does efficiency look like? Help them learn about themselves as we learn about them. For those who are curious, we've already developed a prototype of one of the simulations in VR headsets and are playing with that world, still finding the physicality of the headset a bit cumbersome in what we want to do. But we've got a prototype, and for those who have insights into and ideas for VR applications, that's certainly an area we're interested in. And of course, AI hovers over us all. And for me, I see great opportunities where, again, because I don't have your expertise, I don't want to replace you, but if AI can help us do even part of what you do and bring that to the day-to-day work with our musicians, well, that's very exciting to me. And if we can find that bridge between human expertise and machines helping us along, because again, coming back to this picture to wrap up, I mean, this one excites me, not just in what it tells us about expertise, but I think it helps us push back against that culture, that to deconstruct what we do as musicians somehow devalues it. No, I think it's the opposite. I think this sort of multimodal capture, it reveals new layers artistry, of beauty. It can tell us more about this music as we sort of unweave the rainbow, right, in this process. And I think it's by taking this approach is where we can get musicians excited about this process and involved in this process, which helps us not only in recruitment, right, but it helps drive the why of what we do this research. And this is certainly what makes us excited about it, and why I'm very excited to be meeting all of you and hearing all of your innovations as I learn from you, because there's so much opportunity here to help our musicians do what they do better. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, George. Fantastic talk. I'm sure we have some questions in the room. Yes.
Thank you so much for this inspiring talk. I graduated from the college, so this is kind of like a nostalgic moment for me. As a musician, as a brass player, I was just wondering, in terms of measuring data, what kind of technologies have you come across that might fit us as brass players or as singers? I mean, like musicians that work with parts of the body that are not exposed.
Yes.
Because it's very cool to focus or follow the work of a violinist or a clarinetist who moves the fingers, or a guitar player.
Have you come across the work of Matthias Birch?
No.
He's known as Dr. Trumpet. I give him a Google.
Okay.
He's got a very interesting website where he outlines many of these technologies. He's been, he's not alone in this, but really sort of pushing the sides of, for example, custom mouthpieces that can measure sort of I can't remember, I'm not a brass player, that sort of force on that, or doing work with sort of X-ray to sort of various scannings to reveal what's going on in the mouth and the tongue and the embouchure. So Matthias Birch is the sort of the thread I'd suggest you follow on that. But you're quite right there. I mean, I've talked about the desire to capture data sort of passively, but of course so much of the important data is internal, right? And you're right, brass players, singers particularly sort of experience this problem. For us pianists, a lot of it's sort of on the outside, our behaviors there. So a lot of that, having to infer that knowledge, and also this problem of embodied knowledge is even in expert teaching. Does the teacher have enough knowledge to be able to articulate, what's actually happening is this is lifting? Sometimes they don't know that, it's just by feel. Incidentally, surgeons have this problem. They might be, okay, and then you sort of reach in here, and then you find the gallbladder, and then words sort of end, because it's a feel, it's a tactility. So that embodied knowledge becomes tricky. I mean, what I would imagine there, for example, where it does require these sort of more sort of invasive technologies, as it were, where you maybe have to go into a scanner, you maybe have to wire up. I can imagine that as sort of a pedagogical model where I find that's not the kind of thing you're doing every day or every week or even every month, but maybe once a year, a musician and a teacher has the opportunity to do that, to really see themselves, to understand it, because you can then plant the seeds of that sort of understanding. But who knows, maybe there's sort of other clever ways there, through ultrasounds, through haptics, through interesting sort of visualizations to help people sort of understand that. I think this is where we can be very creative. But crucially, we have to work with the performers to understand what they want and what they need and the language they use. And Matthias Birch, he's a great example of that as a musician himself, and who's sort of customizing these technologies to try to sort of explore that particular area.
Thank you. That was so interesting for me as a teacher. My question is, I guess you already collected a lot of data from the performance anxiety. Did you already kind of also found solutions or something that's helped, or?
Yes, so a lot of our work with these labs is indeed, it's helping musicians sort of have strategies for performance anxiety. And something we're quite careful to do is our goal is never to sort of cure it or to end it, because that's not possible. And indeed, that sort of attempting to do that, it can often actually be quite unhealthy, because what often sort of musicians will do, particularly for those where anxiety is sort of getting away from them. So in other words, that that sympathetic nervous system is activating, and they don't like that feeling. They don't like the fact that they're thinking differently, they're moving differently. Well, they try to suppress it. And how do they do that? With alcohol, with beta blockers, and with drugs. And there's an epidemic still among orchestras and among professional musicians. If the mindset is, this is bad, stop it. Whereas what we know from our research, and we're not alone in this, is when you ask people how anxious they feel, some people, use one of these sort of standard self-reports. Some people, oh yes, I feel sort of quite a high degree of anxiety. And others, often professionals, but sometimes young performers as well. No, I don't feel anxious at all. But when you measure them, when you measure their heart rate variability, when you take those cortisol samples, you find, well, actually, no, that physiological arousal has happened. It's there. They're just interpreting it differently. Some are feeling, it's fight or flight, right? Some are feeling the flight, this is bad, this is scary, run away. And some are the fight, come on, this is performance time, let's go, yeah? So part of the simulators, sometimes it's a little bit of almost exposure therapy, is this is just what it feels like to perform. Let's just learn to be okay with that. And also thinking about, well, let's not practice, then perform, because then you walk on stage with that anxiety and everything feels different. You have to get yourself feeling different in the practice room so that you practice that. My piano teacher would make us run a lap around the building before every lesson. Because when you come in here, I need you to be out of breath and sweaty, because that's what you're like on stage. And I need to make sure we're working on that version of you, because that's the one that matters. So in our case, well, yeah, you get into that heightened physiological, psychological state, so you can practice it. But absolutely, for some people, that sympathetic nervous system gets away from them. So then we work on strategies. If they're having problems with, bad cognitions, they're sort of catastrophizing, they're thinking of worst case scenarios, well then we work on just simple mental imagery. Just picture it going as best as it can, focusing on certain parts. If they're having behavioral challenges, they're shifting around, they're sort of not knowing what to do with themselves, well, find your ritual, find your routine. Is it score study, is it sitting? If they're having problems with the physiological, well, it's breathing exercises, isn't it? Breathing is the magic that can actually, calm that sympathetic nervous system down. So the simulators also become a space to explore how people respond, and also to different triggers. Hey, let's turn the lights on in different ways. Let's give you a mean audience versus a happy one. Let's have lots of empty seats versus a full house. You can actually start to figure out the causalities between specific triggers and responses. So again, they can understand themselves better. So it's a long process, and it's a very personalized process, which is the challenge. Alcohol, drugs, that sort of works on everyone, then obviously there's many long-term consequences. That's sort of the easy way out. But we need to do something much more challenging, which is tailor something to each student, which is why helping the student understand themselves through, say, physiological measurement or biofeedback, and through a simulator that can be customized to their particular needs. That's certainly the solution we take, and it's certainly not an easy one or a cheap one, but it seems to be the most effective one, at least so far.
Are all these findings in your books, or?
There's if you go to the paper that I mentioned about the simulator, it's a short one, but there is some very quick literature review that will point back to a series of the earlier studies, mostly involving Aaron William, that sort of laid out some of these measurements and approaches to performance anxiety. But then there's quite a vast literature on sort of anxiety coping strategies. But I mean, the fundamental ones are the ones that work, sort of breathing exercises, mental imagery exercises, these kinds of things.
I actually wanted to follow up on that because I remember back when I was in college as well, the performance simulator was starting and I used it, and I remember being more nervous because I know Terry Clark was there and I knew it was going to be recorded, and by the fact that there was an audience, a fake audience.
Yeah.
I remember feeling anxious and being surprised by the anxiety. So I was wondering, now that you've evolved a lot, what are the experiences of the musicians in using it, and how do you control for these variables, let's say?
Yeah, and you make an important point there. There's sort of three crucial components to the lab. One is the fact that it's a physical space, so that you can sort of walk around it, you're not sort of trapped in the headset. And two is the technology, so you can see audiences and hear the various sound cues. But the third is the theater, is the fact that the operator is sort of an actor, that when you show up, they're the backstage assistant. So, oh, welcome, come put your coat down, the audience is just getting ready, I'll let you know when they're ready for, I think they're ready now, you better go. And it's that blurring the line between where the simulation starts and stops, and what is and isn't real, and what's technology and what's real life. And so what it means is you don't have to make people actually think it's actually real. In fact, it'd be quite unethical to have someone go into a space thinking it was a real performance, and then it turns out it's fake. Everyone knows it's fake. So it doesn't even have to be purely photorealistic, though ours is really pushing the bounds of that. It's just enough, it has to just feel heightened, the pressure. So even the fact that there is an operator, that there's cameras on you, this all sort of adds to it. Certainly what we're finding with our students, what's been very helpful in this is the new one, it's much more customizable. We've got a much wider range of features. So for example, with the one you would have experienced, the audience was what, 20, maybe 30 people, whereas now we can do 500. So you can have much more immersive experiences. And then the acoustic in particular, this is quite new for us and indeed for many, to be able to add a push of a button, have, oh, here's the Royal Albert Hall, or here's our Britain Theatre, or here's a cathedral, or here's a cave. There's a whole actually separate expanded use case there. Another of my PhD students, he's looking at this right now. So the reactions been very sort of positive indeed. Though if anything, we're a bit of a victim of our success, because now they're going, oh, well, can you simulate this and this and this and this? They want more and more now. Simulate children, simulate a cocktail party. We want them to boo at us, which they don't do yet, because we thought that would be sort of mean, but they want it, so I guess we'll add it. But again, it's there's still a bottleneck to use it, and that's my biggest concern. Even though we now have 2 of them, they can still only use it one at a time. There has to be an operator pushing the buttons. So this is also where I'm very interested in artificial intelligence, that maybe they can replace the Wizard of Oz, an audience that's smart enough that will just applaud when it should and might react on its own when you don't need an operator, just to help sort of reduce that bottleneck and be able to sort of get more people through it as well. And also, as I mentioned, we're going to start up these studies, sort of replicating and expanding some of the validation studies we did with the old one to see to what degree does this very expensive, fancy technology add, or actually maybe, it's nice to have, but the basic fundamental technology is all you really need. Part of me almost hopes that does end up being the case, because that would then make it more accessible for many other people to set their own up. Though, the big one does have its advantages in its flexibility and things like the acoustic. And it's been really exciting to see the different ways our students and faculty have been doing things with it that we didn't anticipate. Simulating marching bands, simulating pit orchestras, lots of things that we hadn't planned for.
Okay, thank you. We have time for one more question, maybe.
Thank you, it was very inspiring, and I just wanted to ask, you mentioned how this your former project was such an efficient way of control to help people study better. My question is how much of a feedback you had on when musicians had they were doing wrong technical principle, for example the high shot, but on something that they were actually trying to figure out for the first time.
Yeah.
And that question is also relevant to the point of evaluation and going back from the data to the musicians. Because if you can speak with a teacher and telling him, okay, you are pointing out these technical principles, but there are these kind of movements and muscles that are moving in this way, and so you can use it to teach again. You see, so because this idea was kind of one of the reasons of the whole treatise about biomechanics, and so I was wondering how this particular aspect has come into play in this project.
Yeah, so there's a few different things in there. So there's one about the evaluation of the physical data, showing them sort of right or wrong. There's something that you sort of alluded to, this idea of tracking it over time, longitudinal data. And then there's something there about, what was the third? Oh, about relating movements to the actual musculoskeletal sort of underpinning mechanics, yes? Yeah. So on the first, about so as I mentioned, with this project, we actually stepped back from displaying evaluation for the most part. The only places where we did evaluation, sort of right or wrong, was with rhythmic accuracy or intonation accuracy, because that was within a bound where we felt pretty confident it meant something to the musician to say, just this rhythm was wrong or not, or this intonation was sort of off or not. Musicians are used to that feedback through tuners and things like this. But on the physical, in that project, we made no attempt to ever, within the software, say, you are moving in an incorrect way. So the example I gave of the shoulder, we never actually built that kind of thing in. Because again, it was just too much of a can of worms. There are some cases where maybe you do want your shoulder up for a particular effect or a reason. So we really focused on, let's just show them what they're doing, and they can decide whether it's good for them. Now that isn't to say that one couldn't, through further knowledge and insights, add layers of evaluation on top. We wanted to create the baseline that you could add that later. And maybe it's customizable. Maybe you tell the system, okay, when I do this, yell at me. Like maybe you decide as the user what the evaluation is, and then the system tells you that for you. Or maybe your teacher programs that in, so that when you're using it in the practice room, you essentially have the opinion of your teacher following you into the practice room. So we're not replacing the teacher, we're expanding their influence. So that was our approach to the evaluation. You make a very important point on sort of seeing it over time. Essentially, we really didn't collect much longitudinal data on this because it was a pain in the butt to get them to be able to use it, because they had to use a violin that wasn't theirs with markers and stand in a certain way. So again, it was just a lot of mostly cross-sectional data, because it just wasn't a system that would do what I would love to do. They couldn't take it with them. They had to come to the lab to use it. They couldn't sort of set it up and just come in and use it easily, maybe every day for a week when we had other people needing to come through. So again, that capture was a bottleneck that prevented us from doing precisely that of what we would want to do, is have a tool that they can use regularly. So that was where we just found the limitation of the capture software. And then finally, quickly, it was definitely ambition we had, was even at the time there were some quite good models that could sort of transfer movement data to a sort of an anatomical model of the human body to sort of suggest, okay, if you're held this way, that probably means you have sort of tension in this muscle and you're pulling here, etc. And indeed, when we asked musicians, what would you want us to measure of you, the number one response among musicians was tension. Often because they're not aware of their own tension in the practice room, because they're in their own head and in the music, until they walk out and go, oh, ow, that hurts. I wish something had drawn my attention to that. So indeed, as those kind of models that can translate the sort of external biomechanical movement to actually what's going on in the musculature, I think those things will be very helpful as well. And indeed, those doing EMG studies, you'll hear a bit from Kobe in a moment as well. I think that would be very useful as well, as you say, to help musicians understand the underlying sort of musculoskeletal dynamics of what they're doing, particularly if it's a system that can be customized to their particular physiology.
Great, thank you so much, George.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.